According to the latest World Economic Forum's Global Risk Report, published in 2022, biodiversity loss and climate change are the two most serious global threats to the future of humanity. Of these two global challenges, the biodiversity loss has been characterized as a silent killer. While climate change has been a hot topic in both academia and society for the past 20 years or so, the biodiversity loss and its critical implications have received much less attention. Biodiversity is a prerequisite for all human life. It provides us with, for example, air to breathe, clean water to drink, and food to eat. It also forms the basis of our economies. Nevertheless, we are now facing a biodiversity loss which is caused mainly by the humans of the developed world. Nowadays, even 1 million species risk going into extinction within the next few decades, and the international goals for conserving biodiversity and ecosystem services cannot be met with the current societal and economic trajectories. It is also evident that biodiversity loss and climate change are linked together in many ways. According to the joint report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, tackling these global challenges are mutually supporting goals, and all policy measures should consider both biodiversity and climate effects in the future. The intertwined combination of biodiversity loss and climate change is an ecological crisis, yet at heart it is also a human crisis. The severe situation is caused by, for example, changes in land use, direct exploitation of species, and pollution. To put it simply, our current way of life is destroying the natural ecosystems on which the well-being and mutual survival of all species depend. As businesses and consumers accelerate biodiversity loss via overconsumption of natural resources, these actors must work towards developing solutions for the crisis. Here in the University of Turku, we are studying actively the interesting interface between biodiversity and economy. We, for example, coordinate the highly multidisciplinary STN-funded Biodiversity Consortium, which combines biodiversity and business research to advance biodiversity-respectful activity via a leadership perspective. Biodiversity combines 4 Finnish universities and research institutes: the University of Turku, Jyväskylä School of Business Economics, Lappeenranta-Lahti University of Technology, and Natural Resources Institute of Finland. Biodiversity respectful refers to living in harmony with nature. Thus, it is associated with profound questions of a good and meaningful life. Sir Dasgupta described this harmony in economic terms as the balance of nature's supply and humanity's needs. According to this view, respecting biodiversity safeguards also the well-being of socio-economical systems.
Overconsumption is one of the most critical drivers of global biodiversity loss. Consumption affects biodiversity in multifaceted ways. The global population has doubled since 1970, and consumption has increased dramatically in both total and per capita spending. Moreover, the production of goods and services has become geographically separated from consumption. Due to global trade and complex supply chains, our consumption often harms biodiversity in distant locations. Consumers have a crucial role in systemic transformation. Besides lowering total consumption and waste, particularly in the Western world, we must enable visions of a good life that do not entail ever-increasing material consumption. Moreover, we must unleash existing, widely held values of responsibility to effect new social norms for sustainability, especially by extending notions of responsibility to include the impacts associated with consumption. Reducing consumption and waste is not easy, as consumption has become an essential part of who we are and intertwines with our daily routine practices. Current consumer societies are fueled by increasing consumption, while a good life is still often understood as a rising material standard of living. Thus, convincing consumers to achieve the same well-being with less material consumption is challenging. Previous research indicates that transformation in individuals' consumption habits or lifestyles requires education, but mere information is not enough. Sustainable human behavior is determined by emotions, beliefs, attitudes, and values, and is influenced by cultural worldviews, social networks, and status inequalities. However, consumers and consumption habits are constantly changing. Much hope is pinned on Generation Z as more conscious future consumers and leaders. Yet the challenge is how to engage masses into biodiversity respectful consumption transformation. Similarly, the experience and sharing economies, in which value creation is based on meaningful experiences and access to goods and services rather than owning properties and products, have the potential to reduce material consumption, but are not enough to solve overconsumption. Thus, systemic transformation requires political leadership and concrete policy measures. The weak sustainable consumption measures mainly concentrate on improving the efficiency of different modes of consumption. The strong sustainable consumption measures such as taxation, advertisement bans, and quotas for selected products and services would more radically change current consumption patterns in ways that would reduce the total need for consumption. However, it is essential to remember the balance of reward and punishment and use both carrot and stick to induce consumer transformation. Previous research indicates that fear and guilt may even increase anti-environmental behavior, while inspiring positive emotions and hope seem to be a more successful strategy toward biodiversity respectful consumption.
So what can companies do to protect biodiversity? One important solution is for companies to invest in nature protection efforts. In addition, firms should try to assess and better understand their own biodiversity dependencies and impacts. A firm's dependencies on nature are often easy to grasp if the firm uses natural resources, such as agricultural commodities, in its products. However, all firms are ultimately dependent on nature and its services. In assessing their biodiversity impacts, firms could evaluate how their activities and those of their suppliers may drive nature loss. An understanding of the key drivers of biodiversity loss, such as the 5 direct drivers listed in the IPBES report in 2019, can be helpful. For example, it may be that raw material production or extraction in the company's operations or supply chains is causing land use changes that negatively affect nature, or that the firm's own facilities and supply chains are responsible for emissions that exacerbate climate change. Through its strategies and actions, the firm could then seek to address the key issues in relevant locations. It is beneficial to consider a firm's entire supply chain because often significant biodiversity impacts are identified at firms' direct suppliers and their suppliers, for example. Globally operating firms can have various types of biodiversity impacts across the planet. To address the key impacts, companies typically need to work together with their supply chain members. As illustrated in the 2015 article by Carter, Rogers, and Choi, firms' traditional supply chain members include suppliers and customers. Suppliers are important partners in biodiversity management too, because they may be able to address some impact directly and to be able to engage their own suppliers. Many companies have set environmental requirements and are monitoring their suppliers against these requirements. More collaborative approaches can involve supplier development and training activities, or joint nature protection and restoration projects with suppliers. Firms could also engage in collaborations with other organizations, including their competitors, nonprofit organizations, multi-stakeholder initiatives, and regulators. Such collaborations are particularly valuable in situations where supply chains are complex or where a firm's biodiversity impacts are otherwise difficult to address through working with suppliers and customers only. In addition to seeking to reduce or eliminate their negative impacts, firms should examine whether they can offer products, services, and solutions which may be helpful for others in addressing the biodiversity crisis. Overall, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development argues in its 2021 report that the business community needs to extend its mindset, actions, and impacts toward regeneration. This means moving beyond perspectives that focus on doing less harm or no harm to ones that seek to heal past harming and ultimately to build self-sustaining capacity for all life to thrive.